Welcome back. During the break, we took a poll amongst our studio audience. We asked them what they thought was the larger risk to India's stability, violence and insurgency, or poverty and hunger. The result is now in. 24% said violence and insurgency, 76% poverty and hunger. You agree with that, Aruna Roy?
I do.
Absolutely in line with your thinking?
I think so, because it's a bigger and a much bigger problem, and the one, if you don't deal with poverty and hunger, you'll have more insurgency.
Professor Dipankar
and violence.
Well, I think poverty and
reaction.
hunger are very, very important. But the fact of the matter is that if you're going to plan for the poor in terms of health for the poor and education for the poor and food for the poor, you'll get poor food, poor health, poor education. What you need to do is plan for the society, which is why I was talking about the democratic revolution, which is waiting to happen. And no one is talking about that.
All right, I'm now going to throw the motion open to the audience in general. India is ripe for revolution. If you have a question, please put up your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. There's a lady in the front row.
I believe that Kautilya said that in order to revolt or change anything or to fight against something, we as India, we have to be one. Now, the only thing I see today which is uniting the country is cricket. But nothing else I see which unites the country totally. India is still in pockets. So when it comes to Assamese or the Assam revolt or uprising which is happening in Assam, or Jammu and Kashmir, rich Brahmins as I would put it.
Let me just shorten your question. You're asking what is going to unite India into a revolution.
We generally sympathize and empathize with them and life goes on. The rest of India says life goes on. So how do you see a revolt happening?
Aruna Roy.
Actually, I don't see one united stand. I think all these individual protests against injustice, against iniquity, against inequality, all linking up to see that if they do not link up, to see the larger democratic needs of a proper country which functions with the rule of law, with accountability and with complete integrity, we won't have a revolution. But I think if you go everywhere that I go, I see the simmering. I just went to Kudankulam where there's an anti-nuke protest, 1 million people on ground there. And 3,000, 4,000 people have been protesting. Today is the 344th day of their protest. And 600 people have been booked for sedition.
All right, Jay Panda, you want to come in on this?
Well, I think people have a right to protest. And in some sense, I agree with Aruna Roy that we need to reform some of our laws. Many of our laws are actually rooted in pre-independence colonial times. And they need to change. We need more transparency. But that doesn't mean we're on the verge of a revolution.
Laws don't stop corruption. I mean, more than half the aid that is supposed to get to people who need it in terms of grain isn't getting there, is
Actually,
it?
more than that.
Because of corruption.
In fact, the Planning Commission has said that only about 27% of the money spent reaches the people.
OK, I want to go back to the question in a moment. What do you think would unite India? And do you think people's patience with poverty, with hunger and with insurgency is limitless?
So I think if the sentiments of indifference continues, I don't think India will ever be united.
Manishankar Iyer, what about this indifference that the questioner is talking about?
I think you're thinking of an India that doesn't exist anymore. There is no patience. The anger that she's talking about, which is simmering, always below the surface and often above the surface, is a real anger. The two questions you asked actually add up to 100% of the audience saying poverty and hunger are leading to violence and insurgency. But they've missed out two things because you didn't ask them. There's a searing sense of injustice in our country. There's an absence of dignity for the people. And democracy is being used increasingly as a means of taking revenge on those who ruled the last 5 years without really an expectation that the next lot they bring in will change. And therefore, we have a situation where, for example, in Jay Panda's state, the coastal areas to which he belongs are really pretty prosperous and doing quite well. But it is in the forest areas of exactly the same state that we have perhaps the largest insurgency going on in the country, along with Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh.
Okay, let him come back on that.
Sure, he can come back. But the point I want to stress is that please don't place before this audience alternatives which are actually linked one to the other. I think there is so much anger in the country that what unites us as a democracy could also unite us in our dissatisfaction unless we take this surface democracy down to the grassroots by actually empowering the panchayats to look after the basic needs.
I'm going to bring Jay Panda in.
Please.
You know, Mani, I wish you wouldn't sweep with such a broad brush about large parts of the country, including my state. You know, even coastal Odisha has a lot of poverty, but it is in transformation, it is changing. Let me quote someone you might be a little familiar with. Swaminathan Iyer, who's a columnist and related to money, writes that agricultural wages have been rising all over India. Now, it is true that tribal parts of India have not been catching up as fast, but again, not with such a broad brush, because even the tribal parts of Odisha can be distinguished, and there are parts that are actually doing better, and there are parts that need to catch up. So I think we need to see the full picture, and I tend to see the glass as half full rather than half empty.
Although Swami's blood is the same as the one that runs in my veins, he has a tendency to generally be wrong. And while agricultural wages have certainly been rising, inflation has been soaring. I don't know whether he's giving figures of real wages or not. I have a suspicion that the extent to which there is dissatisfaction in rural India is connected with the fact that input costs are much, much higher than procurement prices are, that wages are rising higher than, wages are rising less high than inflation is. There is also, much more than all this, a sense of disempowerment. After 65 years of democracy, the people of India should feel that their future is in their own hands.
Okay,
they don't, because there's no Panchayati Raj.
I'm going to bring Dipankar Gupta in here. Searing sense of injustice, Mani Shankar Iyer has talked about.
Well, there is a sense of injustice and searing too, but all of that doesn't add up to a revolution. The reason simply is this, that each of us located in our own individual sphere or a collective sphere, we have interests which differ from the people in a different sphere. For example, the potato growers and onion growers and wheat growers don't think alike. However, I don't believe that India is fragmenting or breaking apart or can never be one. Remember, during the independence struggle, we were one. And why was that so? It's because we had leadership. It's leadership that makes us work together. It is not something spontaneous, it's romantic
leadership
business.
From the elite.
From the elite. And it's not a romantic thing that we all one, we all hold hands and sing songs together. That's not.
But
India
the elite's
being one.
fine. The elite's rich, isn't it? So it doesn't want a revolution.
When you have a certain elite, when you have a certain elite that thinks society, only then can you have a one India. You can have a one India in a xenophobic fashion, anti-Pakistan, stuff like that. But you want to have a real one India that's working towards something. Like in Nehru's time, there was a goal they were working towards, right or wrong, there was a goal. And that brought Indians together. And I think we lack that kind of leadership. Without leadership, there's no democracy. People don't make a democracy. Leadership makes a democracy. Leaders act, people react.
All right, I'm going to take another question from the audience. Lady in the front row.
I just want to ask a question who are supporting against the right for revolution. So we have got independence 65 years back, as you all know that. But there is no, I think, none of us have enjoyed our freedom till now. Because if it's not now, then when we are going to start the revolution, according to you?
Dipankar Gupta.
Well, I'm not sure I quite got your question, but if you're saying that we've been angry, simmering rage for decades, that's true. And this simmering rage has probably been exaggerated by the fact there's a great degree of migration from rural India to urban India. So while what your blood the other side of your, the bloodline may have put out facts which you don't quite agree with, the truth also lies in the migration that's taking place between rural and urban India, which is also leading to a great degree of hope amongst people. This horizontal movement is creating hope. Every time you move from village to slum, slum to a city, a little hope bubbles up.
You seem to see a completely different India from Mani Shankar Iyer. It's as if you're in two different countries.
No, we're not in two different countries.
We're seeing the same India.
No, but there are
same India.
Indias.
But we are arriving at different conclusions. We are converting a concrete ceiling between classes into a glass ceiling. And aspirations are like flies hitting against the glass ceiling. They're unable to rise. And that is why if we were ground in poverty, there'd be no danger. But because there is a rise, very, very slow for most people, and like a ballistic missile for others. There is the seething anger over the injustice of a society, which allows
Okay,
some to reach the
but there are
moon
two
and
Indias.
others to not even reach the
But
ceiling.
Mani, the point is this, that there are people with aspirations and they can't experience what they aspire. There are people who can touch but cannot grasp. I agree with all of that. But if you really want this to become a concrete reality, heading towards a revolution, heading towards some massive social upheaval, you have to have a leadership that takes it forward. You cannot expect spontaneous revolts to take place, uprisings to take place.
No, but
I totally
that is the
agree
point.
with you, but please note,
Mani,
that it is in the poorest parts of India that insurgency is at its
Mani,
highest.
I think you have to take a little hard look at the poorest parts of India. I don't know all the poorest parts of India, but I do know Jharkhand well, and I do know parts of Bihar well. And I can tell you this much. The story that's been put out in terms of Naxalism in these areas is highly exaggerated. What you do have, however, is buccaneer capitalism. You have the worst form of sleazy capitalism going on there, surface mining, no attention to safety of any kind, pollution laws, nothing of the sort. And what is being done, I think, very cleverly, is to use this Maoism as a shield to cover all these wrongdoings that are taking place in these countries. So very often, the story of Maoism is exaggerated by exactly those people who
Aruna
benefit
Roy.
from it.
No, there are two Indias. Let's have no illusion about that. There is Bharat and India.
No, there isn't.
I am in India. I'm in India when I come to Delhi, but when I go to the rural areas, there is Bharat. Education
There is what, sorry?
Bharat. We call it Bharat.
Which means?
Which is India. The way
That's
in
the other name of
constitution,
India in our
India
constitution.
defines
Okay.
itself as Bharat.
Our constitution begins by saying India, that is
we
Bharat.
give India, that is Bharat. So Bharat is the vernacular speaking, where there's bad education, bad health, no access to anything, where you're driving people to urban areas because nobody wants to come and live in a Delhi slum or in a Bombay slum. They want to live in their own areas. You're driving them there. And since I live with those people, I know they don't come with happiness to Delhi looking for some great panacea. They come because they have to.
You cannot have India without Bharat and Bharat without India. You just imagine. Can Delhi last a single day, or Bombay for that matter, last a single hour without Bharat supporting it? It's impossible. You need all the workers from Bihar. You need all the workers from Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand for your steel mills, for your factories, for your textiles, for making shirts, all those things.
But you don't pay them minimum wages.
That's
You
a different
bond
point.
them.
The point simply is
make
that
them
the
live like
Bharat,
slaves.
that
That's just
India
wrong.
they're talking about, without the two intertwining, and of course, this twinning is not a symmetrical one. Without that happening, India, Bharat, by any name, wouldn't last an hour.
Okay,
because you need that
Panda.
Bharat to support India.
Jay Panda.
And
Jay
India
Panda.
to support Bharat.
Jay Panda.
You know, the two Indias are actually coming together all the time. And today in rural India, you will find people making comments through Facebook and demanding accountability in a sense that they were not able to do some time ago. Now, let's talk about rural poverty. Now, we talked about agricultural wages going up. Who is that hurting? It's actually hurting landowners, not the landless poor. So what is the seething anger that we are talking about? There is immense anger against corruption, but there's not going to be revolution. People are going to vote the bums out who are involved in the corruption. Now, migration.
both sides.
No, migration.
Supposing there isn't a choice.
There is choice. There is choice. Now, migration patterns are changing. Look at Punjab today. They do not get labor because migrants from Bihar and Odisha are no longer coming in the same numbers that they used to come over the decades. Things are changing.
Okay, all right. I'm going to take another question. Gentleman in the center there. Yes, you in the check shirt. Yeah.
My question is for the jury, for the motion. They are saying that revolution is RIP. It is about to happen. But what do we expect out of this revolution? We already have democracy in place. What we can do, we can change the structure to make things better. But we are fighting against whom? Government, capitalist, against whom? We don't know that. So how can we say that revolution is RIP?
Mani Shankar Iyer.
I'm saying that we are ripe for revolution. I'm not saying that revolution will take place, because I do believe that if we can only successfully bring down our democracy through a process of effective devolution to become absolutely meaningful at the grassroots on a daily basis instead of once in 5 years, we've still got the time and opportunity to prevent the revolution from taking place. But if we close our eyes and start saying that all is hunky-dory, then we'll have revolution fall on our heads like an apple fell on Newton's head.
Dipankar Gupta, you want to comment on this?
Well, yes, if the apple falls, I hope my mouth is open. I want it to fall that way. But I think that, all the simmering anger that we're talking about, nobody ever doubts it. There is simmering anger, people are upset, there's violence, there's corruption, there's the politicians who look the other way. But the point is that for a revolution to happen, you need a certain kind of leadership. As I told you earlier, for the old-fashioned revolution, you had three conditions. We don't have them any longer. For the new kind of revolution, you need a democratic revolution where I think you're quite right. The rich and the poor must come together because only in coming together can the rich get richer and the poor get richer too. Otherwise, it never happens. So that is why I believe that a democratic revolution where the elite of calling stand up and make a society which is welfare-based, that's the only way to go ahead.
Okay, Aruna Roy.
I don't quite agree because I think, first of all, the leadership question. As a woman and as somebody who believes in democracy, I think the failure has been to look at elitist leadership. It's also been to look at people like me as celebrities. Are we celebrities? We stand on the shoulders of hundreds of thousands of people. And believe me, the people have taught me my politics and my ethics and the way to function are rural people. They are very wise. They don't need us to show them. What we need to do is to listen to them. What Gandhiji did. He said, first listen to them. Listen to what they have to say. It's only then do you know whether they have brains or don't have brains, have intelligence, have wisdom, have solutions. If the Right to Information campaign has succeeded, it has succeeded because it's listened to ordinary peasants and workers. So collective leadership, not individuals. We all have a role to play. Dipankar will be brilliant in his sphere. I may be good in another sphere. And so should all of us be very good in our special spheres. No one individual can lead a country in this present situation. Democracy demands a collective leadership. India has to think of collective leadership and deal with it, go beyond its divides. And it's a huge challenge.
All right, very
just
quickly,
two
and then we're going to move
sentences.
on.
Very quickly. The thing is that in any good democracy is a leader that sets the pace. You think of Nehru, you think of Gandhi. The point that they put before the nation was not by asking the people, what do you think? They said, we think this is right, and the people later on lined up behind them.
Gandhiji listened to people and therefore he fashioned the national movement.
Do you think if you listen to the people, anti-untouchability will come up?
But who's asking you to listen indefinitely? But I'm saying that if Gandhiji had not robed himself that way and identified himself with the people, he wouldn't have had. And then after Gandhi, what's happened?
Okay,
you have to have a collective. You leave behind people.
Okay, gentleman in the third row.
My question is for people who are against the motion. Mr. Panda, you spoke about the middle class. They are getting... I want to say, don't you think there's discontent even in middle class? When I go to a police station, I fear that I may have to pay something. And don't you think that this discontent will spread in middle class, which is manifesting itself in the Anna Hazare movement, and these people will then lead the poor for the revolution?
In fact, the poor don't need to be led. The poor are agitating for their own changes that they want. But you're right.
Your colleague, Professor Gupta, thinks they do.
No, but the point is, the middle class is, in fact, very, very agitated about corruption. The point that you made was about corruption, going to a police thana, going to getting your railway tickets and things like that. Now, this is an issue that has galvanized the middle class, and truly for the first time in about 3 decades or so. There will be other issues, and it's a good thing, because the problem that has been bedeviling Indian democracy is middle class apathy. So I think it's a very good thing.
What about corruption in politics? I mean, you've got 30% of people in parliament and legislative assemblies either charged or facing investigation. What kind of example is that?
It's a terrible example. And in fact, there is a lot of resistance within the political system, which anybody will tell you in India. And that is why we need to build up ever more public opinion against it, that it can't be resisted beyond a point.
I think the most important thing is that political party funds must be made transparent.
Absolutely.
They don't make the funds transparent. It's the most... Party funds must be made transparent. It's a big battle, and you must all battle for transparency of political party funds.
All right, gentlemen in the front row.
We were talking of revolution as it might affect rural versus urban or rich versus poor. But I'm talking of something which is potentially dragging the whole country down as a whole. I'm yearning to ask and check and wonder when somebody will revolt against say, a shabby way of doing things, a chalta hai way of doing things, which has almost become a national habit, if not a national character? When will somebody revolt against gross indiscipline and an indisciplined way of handling just about everything? Because these things, I feel, are dragging the whole country down, and not just the rich or the poor, the urban or the rural people. So I don't even know who to ask the question to.
Well, I do. Dipankar Gupta. who was nodding during the middle of it.
Well, yes, I was nodding simply because I agree with him, because you can't have a revolution for the poor and keep the rich out, the middle class and keep the poor out. It has to be a revolution, or it has to be a systemic change which includes everybody. Which is why I think what Anna Hazare has done is a course correction, something that democracy needs. Democracy needs this kind of mobilization from time to time.
But people are indifferent. People are largely indifferent.
No,
This
they're
is what's
not.
behind the
No, they're
question.
largely indifferent because we have not actually pushed them to becoming really conscious of their status as citizens. And this is what is missing. I think
Who's to blame for that?
I think who's to blame for that? The political system right now is of the kind that makes it very difficult to enter politics because there's violence and there's money. And these two things together keep the good guys out.
Okay, let me go
they
back
are
to
not
the question.
independent people.
While people seem to be charged up about things like corruption, and that's easy to be charged up about, nobody seems to be sufficiently charged up or charged up in sufficiently large numbers about things like a shabby way of doing things, about a chalta hai way of doing things, about an indisciplined way of
you're
doing
very
things.
charged up, aren't you?
I'm very charged up about real issues that the poor feel, have to face. And I think there is no chalta hai in a
What does
poor
that
man.
mean, Chalta?
Make do.
Everything
Make do.
It's okay, just for our foreign audience. Yeah.
I'm all right, Jack. Kind
Everything
of thing.
goes.
Okay.
I
Anyway.
don't think this is true of people who go under the sun and work the fields or sit in brick kilns or work on construction sites. They are doing the very best that they can. And it is they who are not being rewarded as they deserve to be rewarded. And it is this injustice in society as a whole, rather than shoddiness, which is a reflection of that injustice, which we have to understand. I completely agree with you that it was because of this attitude that we had the disaster of the Commonwealth Games. And it is this that is responsible for India not becoming a greater power than it is. But the fact of the matter is that the far more serious issues are those relating to the dignity of the individual, to justice in society.
Tim, I'd like
to
to
a
say
sense
something
of
very quickly.
empowerment.
Okay,
Very
Dipankar
quickly.
Gupta, briefly.
I just want to say something to Mani, which I agree with the sentiment he's expressing. But in a democratic society, inefficiency is unethical. Inefficiency is not something which you can look and say, well, it's all right, it's inefficient. And this inefficiency, which is unethical, hurts the poorest the most.
Oh, I agree.
The poorest people are hurt the most
But for
by this
that,
kind of
my
unethical
solution,
conduct.
just say-
I've given you the
No,
solution.
no, wait,
Let's
Mani.
take governance
So
down
wait.
to the ground.
There again.
Let's have people
Nobody can hear if you
being
shout at
responsible
once.
for
There
their
again,
own efficiencies.
there again,
and
Mani, you're talking about let's
Just
take
one-
it down, which again means an informed elite must take it down.
Okay, Aruna
we
Roy.
are the
Aruna
informed
Roy.
elite.
Exactly.
One
Let's
moment,
take
let
it
me
down.
moment.
Exactly.
I have an example. Inefficiency of the electricity system in my village. Who did it? Not an elitist who came from Delhi, not me. People got agitated. There were meters without wires. They had been charged. So there was a public hearing which people held. 500 people turned up and they realized that they had been taken for a ride and over 10 lakhs had been
Wasted.
wasted away. No, not wasted, pocketed. But in this public hearing, because they did it, now electricity has come, wires have got meters, and bulbs, CFL bulbs, which are supposed to have been supplied to
Okay.
every home, came. So I don't agree with Dipankar that elitists have to do it. I think people can do it. What you need is information
Not elitists.
plentifully
Not
available
elitists.
to
Okay,
them.
okay. We've now come, ladies and gentlemen, to the point in the proceedings we're going to vote on the motion that India is ripe for revolution. If you want to vote for the motion, that is the side represented by those on my right, you're going to need to press button 1. If you want to vote against the motion, the side represented by those on my left, it's button 2. Whichever button you want to press, please do so now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the audience has spoken. The verdict is in. 58% say India is ripe for revolution. 42% say it isn't. So the motion has been carried. Let's look at how you voted before the debate. So the result then was 60% for the motion and 40% against. So you have swung 2% towards those who are against the
Bravo.
motion.
Better, fewer, but better.
Dipankar Gupta? Yeah?
Better, fewer, but better. Let him said that.
Aruna Roy?
Well, I think most of us in India are simmering, and that's what it reflects.
Okay,
Most of us
J
are
Panda.
simmering.
Well, I wish we'd swung the audience
You're not
more than
simmering.
2%, but I think time will bear us out. I think if we look forward to the next 10 or 20 years, we'll have many positive revolutions, but not the kind that they're talking about.
All right, my thanks to our panelists for coming all the way here, to our audience in the studio and around the world. Do keep in touch with us via our website, www.theoutsider.tv. Till then, from the Indian city of Mumbai, good night.